What is it that is going wrong? I would suggest that there are two primary problems that we need to think about in understanding what has gone wrong. The first is what I have referred to as secular stagnation, echoing a phrase that was coined by Keynes' leading American disciple, Alvin Hansen, during the 1930s. In many ways, it's a complex idea, but in many ways, it's a simple idea. Suppose you have economies in which there are a huge number of people who want to save because they're worried about their retirement, because they're worried about more uncertainty, because they're wealthy and they don't have anything else to do with their money, because a rising share of income is going as retained earnings of corporations. So you have, on the one hand, a substantial increase in the propensity to save. And you have, on the other hand, a substantial reduction in the demand to invest. Why might you have a substantial reduction in the demand to invest? Nope, they took my cell phone away from me, so I can't hold it up. But if I did hold up my cell phone, what I would say is that this cell phone has more computing power than the entire Apollo program did. And it cost $500. Think about two companies. Sony. It's a big company. It's a famous company. It's been around for a long time. It has factories. It has plants. It has office buildings. It has tens of thousands of employees. It's worth $18 billion. Now think about another company. WhatsApp. WhatsApp is worth $19 billion. The whole company. All 55 employees. And all the technologies that power that company, they would fit very comfortably in Howard Hall. That is an illustration of the demassification of our economy. And it means you can do a lot of investment with a very little bit of money. Used to be that when you started a venture capital startup because you had a great idea, you needed to get $10 or $15 million. Now, if somebody in this room, or frankly, given the way the world is these days, more likely the child of somebody in this room, wanted to start a new software venture, they could raise $500,000. That would be enough to pursue their dream of creating the next Facebook. All of that means much less demand for investment. And by the way, if you look at the great canonical companies of our era, Apple or Google, they are rolling in cash. So everybody wants to save, and there isn't that much demand for investment. By the way, the workforce of Europe is going to shrink, so there's not going to be a lot of demand for investment to equip new workers either. Lots of saving, not much investment, shortage of demand. Now, what is it that's supposed to fix that? After all, markets are supposed to work and everybody's supposed to be employed. So what would you say? Well, what your introductory economics class would tell you is that the interest rate should fall. And that when the interest rate falls, that'll make there be more investment, and that'll make there be less savings, and the whole thing will sort of balance out, and there'll be enough demand, and the economy will work. Only one problem. The interest rate can't fall below zero. At least it can't fall very much below zero. Because if it fell very much below zero, why would you pay somebody to store your money? Why not just buy a vault and put a lot of currency in it? And so there's a limit to how far the interest rate can fall. So what that means is you have less savings. You have a lot of savings, not much spending. Well, here's the basic truth that Keynes figured out. My spending is your income, and your spending is my income. So if you have a shortage of spending, you have a shortage of income, and the economy contracts. And that's the basic story of the deflationary spiral in which Europe has found itself. That's the basic story, in its essence, of what's held Japan back for 25 years. That's the basic reason why Mark Carney is going to be writing a letter of a kind I could not have conceived of 10 years ago, writing a letter to the Chancellor explaining that he's failed to meet his inflation target because inflation is too low. Too low. And that's why the market is saying that interest rates and inflation rates aren't just going to be low right now while oil prices are low, but they're going to be low for the next decade. Nowhere in the industrial world is the market expecting inflation to be 2% between 2020 and 2025. Between 2020 and 2025. That suggests the magnitude of this problem of excess supply. The other part of the problem, and it's a longer-standing structural problem, is that the nature of production technologies and the nature of global integration is changing. And it's changing for the advantage of the kind of people who are in this room. For the kind of people who are in this room, the general opening up of the world is a great opportunity. Things you once would have done locally are now in a position to do globally. The range of products that you can buy at low cost is much greater. But for many, many of our fellow citizens, it is somebody in India can do their job for a fifth of what they used to be paid to do their job. And part of the reason there are more workers on disability than there are in manufacturing is that a lot of what people used to do in manufacturing, robots do now. The change is coming really fast. I'll give you two examples. Somebody wrote a book about this, very thoughtful book, a professor at MIT named Frank Levy, 10 years ago. He said that there's a great deal that machines are going to be able to do, but it will be a very long time before a machine can make it, this was in the United States, can make a left into ongoing traffic. Actually, 6 years after he wrote that sentence, the Google car drove from Los Angeles to New York, stopping at red lights, going through green lights, and accelerating through yellow lights. Here's another example. And there's actually evidence that this works. And people have actually done this. I'm not making this up. Psychiatry programs. Hello, what's bothering you? My girlfriend left me and my house burned down. How did that make you feel? That must have been very hard. What else did it make you think about? People do these programs. They work. They work. People are actually more willing to confide in the machine than they are in like seeing a person at the other end. It's quite remarkable. But there's actually clear evidence that they work. Well, this kind of technological replacement is also clearly a threat to wages and to employment. Not for the people who set up the companies that have these programs, not for the people who can navigate their way through all this, but for most of our fellow citizens. And so the challenge of generating adequate economic growth and the challenge of making sure that it is fairly distributed is, I would suggest, the challenge of our time. And it is the challenge on which our elected leaders will be judged. Now, this is not without historical precedent. If you think about economic life 120, 140 years ago, a century ago, a transformation associated with the late stages of the Industrial Revolution, not unlike what we're going through, was what was faced. People were in large scale moving into cities. Recurrent financial panic was a source of instability and uncertainty. Income inequality was increasing. 1 out of 8 workers in Victorian Britain was a household servant. And there was anger and outrage at the magnitude of inequality and doubts about the future. And in different ways, whether it was Gladstone in Britain, whether it was the 2 Roosevelts and Woodrow Wilson in the United States, whether it was Bismarck in Germany, society adapted and formed institutions that allowed all that economic energy to come forth, but at the same time that protected a broad middle class and allowed the market to flourish. That, I would suggest, is our challenge today.